Today on BRStv Reef FAQs, we answer how to switch marine salt mix brands safely for a saltwater tank. Hi, I'm Ryan, your host of BRStv Reef FAQs, which is about quick, straight to the point answers to those questions reefers ask all the time. Today we answer a pretty common question: how to switch salt mixes. This is a good question. I think at face value, it shouldn't matter how you go about this because all of the popular artificial seawater mixes have proven themselves to be capable of a solid reef tank. But the reality of this is kind of different. Changing salt mixes does frequently have setbacks. The biggest question is, why is that? I don't have a definitive answer to that other than clearly they're not all the same, otherwise this would not be the case. The two most obvious answers is some have pretty significantly different major, minor, and trace elements, some desirable, and some maybe less so. So the first part of this is I always recommend selecting a salt that's close to the calcium, alkalinity, and magnesium levels you want to maintain in the tank. But if part of switching salts is you want to significantly raise or lower the levels, you want to do this slow, and this is part of the strategy that I'll share today. The other part of this is all the major raw materials of the salt come from different sources, which inherently have different impurities, the most important being the magnesium, calcium, and sodium sources, which are either largely derived from minerals mined out of the ground or dehydrated sea salts, or various degrees of purification ranging from adequate for the application to more intensive standards like pharmaceutical grade materials. The thing is, the corals are amazingly adaptive creatures if we just give them the time to do so and then maintain that environment stably. So it's very possible the corals will adapt to something like high lithium levels if you give them a chance, but they'll not appreciate rapid changes back and forth. The presumption here is switching from a lower quality salt to something higher grade can only be a benefit. But if the corals have adapted to possibly higher lithium or an other element outside of truly toxic levels, stability is actually what corals appreciate most. So I think we should just assume slow change is better regardless of what salt we came from or going to. One thing I'd like to keep in mind here is tons of reefers have switched from one salt all the way up to 100% water changes and not seen a setback. However, others have had more negative experiences. The difference here is probably the corals that they keep, maintenance practices, and the two salts that they were using and switching to, which is all different. What we're going to do here today is describe what I'd call amongst the highest percentage paths to success with the least amount of effort. Step one is decide if you really need to switch. If your tank is doing well and meeting all of your goals, just stop in your tracks and don't bother switching. Don't switch just because someone has a better label or marketing hype either. Look for something definable. I'd say there's 6 common reasons that reefers switch salt mixes. The first is obviously it's cheaper. The cheapest thing that works is an obvious attractant. After that, it gets more about performance and ease of use. Second, the salt matches the desired calcium, alkalinity, and magnesium levels for your tank better than the one that you're currently using. Third, the salt mix is faster, meaning it's ready for use in hours rather than a day or two. Fourth, it mixes easier, meaning there's limited equipment involved, like a heater isn't required, and after it's fully dissolved, doesn't require a pump for prolonged storage. Fifth, the salt mix doesn't contain visual contaminants that can collect in the salt bin as that common brown crud that crusts the bin or form that brown organic foam at the top. Not all of them do that. Sixth, the salt mix has some clear, sustainable quality or purity standards that goes beyond marketing hype, has actual meaning and some degree of transparency. Some good examples of that are Red Sea's My Batch ICP and Aquaforest quality certificate test results match the bucket that you came from. Something found on both of their sites. Tropic Marin's approach to using pharmaceutical grade raw materials, meeting an independent standard on the front end, being another example. There might be some other reasons to switch salts as well. These are just some common ones. The only one I caution against is grows corals better or worse than another. Well, one absolutely has to do that better than another. It's completely anecdotal and unique to each person's experience and their combined approach to reefing, and there's significant confirmation bias involved. I think a better angle on that might be, rather than the unicorn of the absolute best salt, just being satisfied with using one of the best options for that growth and coloration goal, but also achieves more definable goals that also lead to a healthier, easier run tank. Okay, so all that said, what's the best way to switch salt? There are 2 distinct paths here based on limiting the impact of changing both the desirable and undesirable changes to major, minor, and trace element levels, and they're somewhat dependent on your strategy to water changes. If you have what's becoming an increasingly popular water change schedule of 10% weekly, or use an automated water change solution which does small amounts every day, the solution is easy. Just mix up the new batch of salt and switch. to 10% weekly or 1 to 3% daily is inherently slow enough that it'll take months to completely change over, and there won't be any drastic changes to water chemistry during that time. The second path is based on a water change schedule of something close to 20% every 2 weeks or 30 to 40% once a month. In this case, there's potential for appreciable change to water chemistry. To limit that, I think the best path is to mix the two salts gradually together and then switch over. That gradual mix changeover that I would personally recommend is 75% current salt, 25% new salt with the first change, 50-50 for 2 changes after, and then 25% current salt and 75% new salt for the 4th change, and then 100% new salt from there on. Of course, pay attention to how the tank responds and slow the process down if you think the tank would benefit. Hopefully that clarifies some of the reasons why a reefer might change salts as well as an easy path to do it. If you're interested in exactly how long it takes for a salt to properly mix, check out Randy's Investigates. He also had a quick one on the difference between Tropic Marine Pro and Classic. Of course, every last video on salt can be found in the salt category of the bulk resupply site, with that little box being a quick shortcut. See you next week with another episode of BRStv.